All right, thank you for staying with the Monday Report. It's time now for the conversation. We're talking about the finance bill. My guest already with me in studio. Kwame Owino is here. He's the CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you for making time. Joy Kiiru, an economist and a lecturer, is also with us in studio. Asante sana for making time. Honorable Kimani Kuria, Member of Parliament for Molo, and also the Chairperson, Finance and National Planning Committee, is joining us from Mombasa. So before we get into the nitty-gritties, which I have back here, on some of the proposals that are in the finance bill, you have until the 20th to give your views, your memorandum to the National Assembly on what your thoughts are on the finance bill. But Kwame, I'll start with you. Is this a prudent proposal in your view, generally, before we get into the nitty-gritties?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. So some of it is acceptable, some of it is just plain bad, some of it will just be harmful to people. So like everything else, I mean, it's a mixed bag. We understand the circumstances in which it is prepared, but it can't be a good thing for working people, given the circumstances.
Okay. Joy, what are your thoughts, preliminary?
Yes, my thoughts are just like Kwame, some are okay.
Yeah.
Others have been designed to undermine others, to undermine the outcome of others. Well, others just beat logic. You can't imagine why somebody would think of some of these things.
Okay. So what beats logic in your view?
For example, I thought owning a home or not is a very personal decision. You decide where you want to retire, and nobody should tell you, you know, you need to plan and retire in a high-rise building somewhere in outskirts of Nairobi. I mean, that's a personal decision. And I believe normal Kenyans are very rational beings. Given their priorities, their income, they know what they need to address first. And that personal space should be respected. So it beats logic where somebody wants to invade personal decisions and make them national deliberations.
All right.
Me, I don't understand.
All right. Let's go through this, and I'll go to Molo, Member of Parliament, in just a bit to find his preliminary thoughts on this. But let's start off right where you brought it out, Joy, because that's the first thing we're going to talk about here. The first proposal here, housing fund, 3% to be paid by employees, 3% to be paid by employers. Contribution should not exceed 5,000 shillings. Is this fair or even right, Kwame, in your view?
Certainly not. Let's talk about the fact that this is typical of Kenya Kwanza. I mean, they're basically implementing what was in their manifesto. A bad idea in every way. So first, there's an assumption, as Joyce says, that everybody wants to own a house and wants to own it in urban areas. But the thing that is ignored here the most is that more than 80% of Kenyans actually own the homes in which they stay. The problem might be the quality of that house, and that in itself is actually dependent on the quality of inputs. So the prices for construction material is very, very expensive and very, very high. And there's something for government to do that. But there's an obsession with funds. As we said in the manifesto, we looked at the manifesto of Kenya Kwanza, and the word fund appeared 30 times in the whole document, showing an obsession with creating funds. I think that we are solving a problem that does not exist by talking about a housing fund. I think it will also displace savings, because if people already have their savings to construct homes, as Joy has said, and you're forcing them to do, they will. But the third part is basically the design. What it says is that you'll contribute that, and after 7 years, you have the option to check out. Now, what that means is that it's a fund. We don't know that its returns will actually beat what your saving somewhere would be. So what it will do is actually shrink your money if you know what the funds are, whether it's your NHIF, NSSF. Usually they don't give you good return. There's nothing that tells us that this will be. But I fear that it is actually just a mechanism for redistributing, because they'll construct homes. There'll not be as many as or what people want, but it will be distributed to other people. So it'll burn a lot of money. So it's just a bad idea being fueled on a rocket. And I think it won't end well. In addition to, of course, the corruption that will come from it, it will not end well.
But Joy, there's a housing demand estimated at 250,000 houses annually, with a supply of just about 50,000 new houses annually. There's a 80% annual housing deficit. So what other means would be there for the government to bridge this 80% housing deficit? Let
me answer you indirectly.
Yeah.
We were suffering from traffic, both in Mombasa Road and Thika Road. Supposing somebody tells you that there's demand for road space and there's demand for freeways, let us contribute and put up a superhighway and put up an expressway. How would that sound to you? PPP should be enough for this, but that is public public-private partnerships should do the trick in terms of housing, because then people will self-select depending on what makes sense and their priorities, because that is the sovereignty of the rational consumer. That should never be taken away from them.
Okay.
And there is, in other words, there is prospects of making profit from this housing. There is prospects. Then why don't private persons and government put their money into it and let people, the normal person, decide whether to go for it or not, depending on what is best for them? I think that's my whole argument, feeling like my private space and my power to decide for myself is being invaded. I think that's my problem with the whole thing.
Can I add something before you go back?
Yes.
I think, look, if you live in Nairobi, perhaps it's different for other urban areas, but if you live in Nairobi and you walk through the middle areas where we are and situated up there, walking towards the central business district, you see a lot of tower blocks that are unoccupied, and some of them have been unoccupied for almost 2 or 3 years. So when someone says there's a shortage of 250,000 houses in Kenya, what kind of houses are they talking about? If they're going to construct more tower blocks up here, which many of them, if you scale it by annual incomes, is equivalent to 19 years of an average income. That's not what Kenyans are looking for. Secondly, and I don't mean this as a joke, the national census in 2019 showed that less than 1.7%, it might be 1.3, but a figure less than 2% of Kenyans are homeless. So what we need is home improvement, not necessarily more brick and mortar. So the argument that there's a 250,000 deficit in housing in itself is actually contestable for us at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I think if you're thinking about houses with a flying garden at the top, three bedrooms and ensuite, maybe so. But the market is already telling you that there's a surfeit of them in Nairobi, even in Mombasa, and no one's buying them.
So it's the pricing that's not right then?
It's the incomes that are low. And when somebody has an average income of 20,000 shillings per month, and I sympathize,
all right,
giving him a block that requires him to pay 45,000 shillings is not good use of resources.
Okay. Let me bring in Honorable Kimani Kuri on this. Honorable Kimani, let's start off with your views. Is this a prudent proposal in your view?
Thank you very much. Looking at this time when you are doing the finance bill, we are drafting the finance bill during very interesting times. The financial crisis globally, us having come from a pandemic, and the contracting sectors across the economy, whether it is manufacturing, whether it's banking, where all these particular sectors have been contracting. And when we are faced with all these challenges, we have a debts of around 9.39 trillion shillings. And out of that, therefore, it only gives us a leg room of around 610 million shillings. And now, when you compare our fiscal deficit for 23-24 alone, we have a fiscal deficit around 663 billion. So we have 666 billion. So we have a challenge that the leg room that we have in terms of borrowing to finance our expenditure, in terms of expanding financing both our recurrent and development expenditure, is much more than our fiscal space. And therefore, Kenyans have told us that they do not want us to borrow more. What do they expect of us? They expect of us to introduce measures to raise more revenue, to increase our tax base, but at the same time sensitive to the need of job creation, especially among our young people. The proposal to construct these houses, most people will think about just the brick and mortar. But we are talking about the millions of jobs that are going to be created in this construction sector when you're doing this housing. You should go, Trevor, in any of those sites where we have done affordable housing, whether it is in Pangani, whether it is in Ongata Rungai, whether it is in Nakuru, and the others that are being rolled up in every constituency. These houses are going to provide jobs, and especially jobs in the informal sector. We're talking about every house will need doors, they will need windows, they will need all these facilities that are needed in building of these houses. And we're even coming up with a policy and saying that even these doors that we're going to do in all this affordable housing have to be standard. So even our graduates are coming from our TVETs, our universities, and actually getting some skills, whether it is in masonry, whether it is in woodwork, can actually make a window or a door and be sure there'll be more than 250,000 houses across the country that will need these particular doors or these particular windows and all these jobs that are going to be created in this housing. So we're not looking at just a fund, but let us look at the bigger picture. of improving the livelihoods of our people by creating employment to them, by putting food to the table, and consequently, therefore, by even increasing the revenues that we raise. If you look at this finance bill, we have so many other things that we have improved on it to make sure that we reduce the cost of living for our people. And if you just take a minute to pick two of them. The LPG gas, for example. LPG gas over the years have always been subject to VAT. We have taken out that VAT, the 8% VAT on LPG gas is now scrapped off. The railway development levy that was on that VAT has been reduced. If you're talking about the import declaration levy that was part of the LPG gas has reduced. So consequently, we hope that if this finance bill, even if it passes as it is, we are going to see the cost of cooking of LPG gas come down by more than 10%.
Yeah.
So we have done measures to make sure, because we are torn between a hard rock and between a rock and a hard place,
yeah,
where Kenyans have said they do not want to be overburdened by borrowing. So how do we make sure we improve on our revenues, but at the same time making sure that we create jobs? And that is why, for example, the agenda on housing is hoping to do, and I'm sure it is going to get done. We are going to have people having houses, and at the same time creation of millions of jobs across the country, especially for our young people and people in the informal sector.
Yeah. Kwame, is that an argument that you would buy, that we will ask them not to borrow, so they have to find ways because the country is locked between a rock and a hard place? Can we tax ourselves to economic stability?
Let's start with the fact that when Kenya Kwanza came in, they made a very eloquent case for the fact that, look, there's a lot of public wastage, and the president went to parliament and said that he has agreed to actually chop down public expenditure by 300 billion and asking parliament to support that. Now, it looked ambitious. What has happened instead is, in addition to that, the supplementary budget asked for another 60 billion of extra spending, separate from what President Uhuru Kenyatta's, the budget that was signed by that. And then here we are spending an additional 600 billion. So the belief that we're actually going to tax ourselves to prosperity is in itself, I mean, it just defies belief. And the second point is, look, I think that we cannot say that sprinkling money here and there is going to create jobs. I think these are things that government has said so often and not. So I don't agree with the fact that you say we'll keep everything as it is, spend an additional 600 billion, and because we are in a tight space, what you do is actually squeeze by sprinkling all over, seeking taxes. And as Joy said, some of them are actually incoherent and inconsistent with one another, so they're cancelling each other out. I think the mess that's going to occur, it looks like every single thing that we thought about, there's a very complicated tax law, the new one. My view is that it's not going to end well.
Yeah. Joy, is this going to balance in terms of cutting down on more disposable income by higher taxation, but increasing jobs by creating manual jobs for housing, like Honorable Kuria is saying? Will that help balance the equation?
That is what they are thinking, but there is no justification. But first, before I come to that, let me react to what the policymakers said. Yeah. Affordable housing, they keep calling it. Affordable to who? And who decided that that's affordable? It's the same dictatorial tendency that Kenya Kwanza say that they know what Kenyans want, what Kenyans need. We're giving it to you. And I think affordable housing, you need to define that. Who are you targeting? Secondly, we are talking about providing jobs because of all these materials which will be used. For how long? What happens after we build a house within a period of time? What is the long-term game plan to that in terms of sustaining these jobs which are coming from there? You tell us the whole story about your plan. And then addressing debt, the idea of borrowing and saying, the idea of saying that we are not going for more debt. As an economist, I know that if you wanted to address the issue of debt through a rising, tax measures, they should not be one-sided. We are seeing like this strategy of addressing debt is one-sided in such a way that it is the hustler who is carrying on the shoulders throughout this taxation. We are raising money for this, having this tax, this fund, and things like that. But where is the debt consolidation? What is government doing to ensure that they are also taking their fair share of the of what is required in terms of reducing this public debt. I spent the whole afternoon looking at the debt consolidation measures.
Yeah.
What is the government doing in terms of reducing expenditures here? But I haven't found any.
Okay.
And that's very, very unfair to the hustlers who you have decided we are not going to borrow, but you're going to bear the brunt of it.
Yeah.
What is the government doing to carry their fair share? I think I need to know.
So austerity measures, Honorable Kuria, that's the question, that how come government is not taking its fair share of austerity measures? And how did you arrive at the 3% for the housing levy?
That's a very interesting question. And one of the things that we're willing to bite the bullet as Kenya Kwanza government, and you've seen the discussion about that proposal even coming to Parliament, is, for example, to change the debt anchor from being a nominal value to being a present value percentage of our GDP. In the essence means, to answer the economists that asked this particular question, is that we're putting us to account that our debt, the amount of money that we have accumulated as our debt must grow our economy. And that is why it has to be pegged as a percentage of GDP rather than just the nominal value we have of a particular 10 million shillings. A lot of arguments have been said about austerity measures and about government reducing spending. But the realities on the ground is we still have millions of homes across the country that do not have connection to the national grid. We still have very many roads that have not been constructed. We have many contractors that have down their tools because they have not been paid for works that have been done. We have our counties that are telling us we need to disperse monies in time. We have employees of our county government and national government, which the national government and county governments have a contractual obligation for. And therefore, it's not just something you can wake up tomorrow and say you're not going to pay the salaries, you're not going to spend the equitable share to our county governments. The commitments that was made, especially by the previous regime, in terms of all these construction, have to be honored. That is why we're saying that let us bite the bullet for now, but let us make it bearable. And how do we make it bearable? For example, we are talking about there's a very big percentage of people that have been either undertaxed or have not been paying their taxes at all. For example, our Income Tax Act that gives rise to the tax brackets has for the longest time only had taxation or change of band up to the people that earn $500,000 shillings a month. But even if it's a small percentage, you have quite a number of people that actually get to earn more than $500,000 shillings a month. And that's why we are increasing the tax for the rich, for those people that are making more than $500,000 shillings from that tax bracket of 30% to 35%. And this therefore is going to lead to a very high increase in terms of the numbers that we're going to collect. On this housing fund that seem to be very elusive or that seem to be taken very politically. These houses are not just going to be houses that are being constructed in the city. And even the ones that have been constructed in the cities, you should see the rate of intake. Even before groundbreaking of new houses that are being done in parklands, we have more than 100% commitment to them. And we are going up and saying we even have a model where the entire 290 constituencies will identify a piece of land in their constituency, and you're going to have those house pilot projects in 290 constituencies in the country. And therefore, what essentially is going to happen is that you're going to turn our country into a construction site, whether it is that skilled plumber, whether it's that local hardware, whether it is that a person who needs kibarua ile tunaita kazi ya mkono, there is going to be work for everybody. And again, take into cognizance that with the global competition and with all the challenges across all sectors, where I repeat, you have seen contraction of all the other sectors of development, whether it's manufacturing and everything else, then we have found a method that can work for our people. Because every time, even if you go to any of the estates or any places in this country, you find when there is subdivision of land, when people start constructing, you see that communities start growing. You see development going to those places. And that is why we strongly feel that the way to this housing levy, the way to doing these houses, not just in the cities but across the country, will actually have a very great impact of spurring economic growth.
Yeah.
Not even to mention, Trevor, what you're doing with the inflation adjustment. You know, for a very long time, we have made our tax environment in this country very unpredictable, where immediately after we've passed the finance bill around June, then we give authority to the Commissioner General to decide what rate of inflation they're going to use to change from excise duty. And we have stopped that. We have removed that inflationary adjustment, and that means that we have a predictable business environment that's going to attract investment in this country that will spur, again, economic growth and create employment and make sure that we bake more cake for the public of Kenya.
Honorable Kuria, there are three options that will come to Parliament. Either you'll adopt it as it is, or make amendments, or reject. So is there space to make amendments for interest for the people whose housing levy fund will be deducted from them? They don't want the house. At the end of the 7 years, will they get an interest? Because it's like mandatory taxation.
It is not a taxation, it is a savings plan. In fact, it has an added advantage to the contributors of that scheme, because we have made it mandatory that once you contribute 3% of your salary into this fund, your employer has to match another 3%. And therefore, at the end of the 7 years, you have the leeway to withdraw from the fund. And if you do, you get the money that you've saved back, plus all the interest that you have accumulated. And remember, you get the 3% that you contributed, the 3% that was contributed to the employer, and the interest that will be included from the fund. And this actually means that, unlike what you have, like, for example, for National Social Security Fund, whether even after saving, you only get to take up your fund almost at retirement, and if you get to take that money from my retirement, you lose from the benefit, that does not apply to this. After the end of seven years, you can withdraw from the fund, you can transfer that fund to your spouse, or to your children, or to someone else who will be eligible for that particular fund. And again, you are paying 3% of it, and your employer is being forced by the proposed piece of legislation, the finance bill, to contribute 3%. So how can you get to benefit? Because like a 3% increase on your income.
Okay. I want to move on to the next conversation, but do you think that's prudent?
No, it isn't.
Kwame?
It isn't, because...
is it not even an advantage to an employee?
No, it isn't.
The employer gives 3%.
Look, if you're going to force an employer to actually have to pay an additional 3% of income and wait for 7 years, and then which will be accumulated which will be taken away by the employee, you're telling that employer to actually pay you at the beginning 3% less because they know that money will go away with it. I think these things require a little bit more. And I know you have a belief in power of government. What will happen is people will casualize work, so that you're a casual worker for which you're paid a single amount, and obviously that payment will not go in. So quite apart from the administrative arrangements for this, I think this thinking about how employers will respond to forcing them to another 3%, you're going to have NHIF contributions here, NSSF contributions here, it's not very well thought of. And you are far more... you have a far more rosy picture about what the employment structure of Kenya is than really is. Let me finish with this housing thing, because I think it's very, very important. The number of households in Kenya is close to 14 million. 14 million different units. So if you're going to add 250,000 or even 500,000, look, you are providing it to such a small slice that your belief that 250,000 units is going to create more jobs than the 14 million have, has to be based on wishful thinking. Good luck.
Okay, Joy, let's move on to the next conversation here. And now that's the next slide. We're talking about, Kimani Kuria touched on it a bit. It's more about taxation of people who earn more than 500,000. Now it will be at 35%. So it means from the get-go, 175,000 will be taken to pay as you earn. So should we take a break first and then come into that and see what you're saying? But Kiiru, is that overtaxation?
Maybe before I answer that, let me step a little bit back and say thank you so much for having my back. I think I wanted to say fiscal consolidation. And I think in my mind I was talking about debt consolidation, which are two different things.
Yeah.
I meant fiscal consolidation, but then you had my back and you put it right. Thank you so much for that. Now, coming to your question, 35% for individuals who earn more. I think paying taxes is an obligation, but the question is, when I pay my taxes, what do I expect, and do I get it? That is really the question which is out there. It's true, earning a salary of more than 500,000 in Kenya, even university professors don't earn that. It's quite a good salary. But what are they paying for? What services are they getting in return? It's really a pity that you pay such high taxation, including all these other taxes which are not included there, that you keep paying even after paying the taxes. And at the end of the day, you still have to foot your own medical bills. despite the so-called universal health care. I come from Makueni, and we have so-called universal health care that was started by the previous county government. And sometimes I keep asking myself, do they give the patients a healing bed or a death bed? For example, if you go to, I'll talk from experience. My housekeeper's mother was once admitted at a hospital in Makindu Hospital. Guess what? She had to go with someone, a private nurse, a daughter, a relative, to be there for them and give them all the nursing services. And they thought that is not enough. The hospital had no medicine at all. And the pity thing is that small pharmacies at Makindu, as small as it is, I'm talking from experience, they open 24 hours because most of them are owned by health practitioners in these hospitals, and they refer you to get medicine, even in the middle of the night to come. Maybe you need a drip, go buy it here. So, is that the kind of universal health care we want? And they kept on saying, is this supposed to be a deathbed or a healing bed? What is it they're giving us? So at the end of the day, I've said it again here, Kenyans would rather not have free things because we contribute these things, we don't see the services, we don't get the... So I think if they're going to be taxing people that much, they better start by proving that they can
so the taxation has to be equivalent to the service delivery. I'll come to you, Kwame, for that comment in just a bit. Honorable Kuria is saying you're taxing the rich by this. We'll see what your comments are also at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. We're taking a quick break. I see a lot of your views coming through. We'll ensure we read as many of them as we can, all right? So keep them coming.